The morning light streamed through the blinds, but Daniel Foster barely noticed. 2 weeks had passed since Linda, his wife of 35 years, was gone, and the house they'd shared in a quiet Ohio suburb now felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Every corner carried a memory. The kitchen, where she used to hum while making coffee. The garden she tended with such care. The worn spot on the couch where they'd watch old westerns together. Friends told him to keep busy, but Daniel couldn't shake the hollow stillness that followed him from room to room. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed louder than ever, a steady reminder of time moving forward, whether he wanted it to or not. He'd thought the hardest part of losing Linda would be the grief, but grief had a way of being honest. What he hadn't expected was the quiet fear of what came next, of living in a house that suddenly felt far too big for one. Man's footsteps. He wasn't ready to pack away her things or strip the walls of their shared life. And yet, deep down, he knew change was coming. He just didn't know that it wouldn't come from within. It would come from the people he least expected, in a way that would force him to decide what and who truly mattered. Daniel was still. In his robe when the phone rang that Thursday morning, he glanced at the caller ID, Mark Foster. His son rarely called without a reason. "Dad," Mark began, voice smooth but a little too deliberate. "Laura and I have been talking. We're worried about you, that house. It's just too much for one person. All that space, the upkeep, the property taxes. You don't need the burden right now." Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring out the kitchen window at the yard Linda had loved. The burden, he thought. The real burden was the empty chair across from him at breakfast. "Not mowing the lawn or paying a tax bill," Mark continued. "We think it might be time to sell. You could move into a nice condo, low maintenance, close to us. We already know a couple interested in buying. They're ready to make an offer." It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a proposal already set in motion. An hour later, Laura called. She led with sympathy, but it was sympathy wrapped in urgency. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. That house, it's too big. And let's be honest, it's not like you're using all that space. You could take the money, downsize, and live comfortably. We could even help manage things for you." Daniel's jaw tightened. Help manage things. He knew what that meant. His kids weren't just thinking about his well-being. They were thinking about the value of the house, the cash it could bring, and how it might help their own financial situations. He kept his voice even. "The house is paid off. Mother made sure of that 6 years ago. There's no mortgage, no financial pressure." There was a pause on the line, the kind that speaks volumes. Neither of them had known that. "That's surprising," Laura finally said. "Still, Dad, think about the maintenance, the repairs." And nothing. Daniel cut in, still calm, but with a firmness they hadn't heard from him in years. "This is my home. Your mother loved this place. I'm not making any decisions in the middle of my grief." After hanging up, Daniel sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the kitchen. His children's concern might have sounded genuine on the surface, but underneath, he sensed a different motive. They were circling, assessing, making plans, and they'd underestimated him. He walked into the living room and ran his hand along the banister, remembering the day they'd moved in. Back then, the house had been filled with the laughter of 2 kids racing up the stairs, Linda calling them down for dinner. Now those same kids were adults, talking to him like a fragile old man who needed direction. The truth was, Daniel didn't feel fragile. Sad, yes. Lost, certainly. But not helpless. And the more he thought about their calls, the more a quiet resolve began to take shape. They didn't need to know everything about his plans or his resources. He stood there, looking at the family. Photos on the wall, and something in him shifted. This wasn't just about keeping the house. It was about keeping control of his life, on his terms. What Mark and Laura didn't realize was that the man they were speaking to wasn't ready to hand over the keys, figuratively or literally. Not now. Maybe not ever. By the time the sun set that evening, Daniel knew one thing for sure. He would listen. He would nod. But the decisions, the real decisions, would be his alone. And if his children thought they could pressure him into selling the life he and Linda had built. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The following weekend, Mark showed up unannounced. Daniel heard the knock sharp, impatient, and opened the door to find his son standing there with a clipboard and an envelope. "Dad, I wanted to drop by and talk face to face," Mark said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Laura and I found a realtor who's willing to give you top dollar. You wouldn't have to lift a finger." Daniel motioned toward the kitchen table, more out of habit than hospitality. He sat down across from his son, folding his hands calmly. "Before you start," Daniel said, "there's something you should know. The house is paid off. Has been for 6 years. Mark froze, mid-sentence. "Paid off? Since when?" "Your mother took care of it," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "She didn't tell you because it wasn't your business, it was ours." A flash of something crossed Mark's face. Surprise, yes, but also something sharper. Disappointment? Calculation? Daniel couldn't be sure. "That's good, I guess," Mark said slowly. "But think about it, Dad. A paid-off house in this market? You could get a huge return. It's a lot of cash just sitting here when it could be working for you, or helping the family." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Helping the family," he repeated, almost to himself. "I'm fine financially. I don't need to sell, and I'm not looking for a return. This house is where your mother and I built our lives. It's where I'm staying." Mark set the clipboard down on the table, his voice tightening. "You're not thinking about the long term, Dad. Maintenance costs, property taxes, they'll eat away at your savings." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Slightly. I've thought about the long term more than you know. I'm not interested in selling to some couple you and Laura have lined up. This is my decision, not yours." There was a long silence. Mark's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Finally, he stood, sliding the envelope back into his coat. "Fine. But at least promise me you'll think about it." "I already have," Daniel said simply. After Mark left, Daniel stayed at the kitchen table for a while, his coffee growing cold. Thought about Helen, about the quiet, determined way she'd handled things. She'd never been one for big speeches, but she'd known how to protect what mattered. That's when it truly sank in. His children's push to sell wasn't about making life easier for him. It was about what the sale could do for them. Saw the house as an asset to leverage, not a home to preserve. And now, with the truth about the mortgage out in the open, he realized they might push harder. But knowing their intentions gave him an advantage. He rose from the table and walked into the living room, letting his eyes travel over the photographs on the wall, wedding pictures, family Christmases, birthdays, long past. Every frame held a piece of history, of choices made together. Helen had fought to keep this place debt-free for a reason. Daniel felt a quiet resolve settle in. He wasn't just holding on to the house for sentiment's sake. He was holding on to it because it represented control over his life, his memories, and his future. If Mark and Laura thought they could pressure him into giving it up, they were about to discover that their father had more fight left in him than they imagined. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Mark's visit had left him uneasy, not just because of the push to sell, but because of the look in his son's eyes when he learned the house was paid off. It wasn't relief. It was calculation. He found himself wandering into Linda's old study, a room he hadn't touched since the funeral. The faint scent of her lavender hand cream still lingered in the air. Her desk sat in the corner, neat as always, a small brass lamp casting a warm glow. For years, Linda had insisted on keeping her own filing system. Daniel had never questioned it. She'd been the organized one. But now, with the kids circling like hawks, he felt an urge to see what she might have left behind. He opened the bottom drawer and saw it immediately. A slim, blue leather folder, tied with a ribbon. His heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. Sitting at the desk, he untied the ribbon and began to flip through its contents. The first item was a stack of bank statements from accounts he didn't recognize, all in Linda's name, each showing healthy balances. Next, a crisp envelope from a law firm in Lisbon, Portugal. Inside was a property deed, a villa in the coastal town of Algarve, also in Linda's name. Daniel stared at the words, struggling to process them. He had never once heard her mention owning property overseas. There was more. A life insurance policy naming only one beneficiary, their granddaughter, Emily. Not Mark, not Laura, just Emily. And finally, tucked at the back, a handwritten letter. Daniel. It began in Linda's careful script. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I love our children, but I know them. They will try to take what we've built, not out of malice alone, but out of entitlement. Protect yourself. The house is yours. Never let them convince you otherwise. The villa in Portugal is for you to use as an escape if they push too hard. Anna, the caretaker, can be trusted. Peter Alvarez, my attorney in Lisbon, will help you keep it safe. Wanted you to have options, because I don't trust them to respect your choices once I'm gone. Daniel read the letter twice, his hands trembling slightly. Linda had seen this coming. She'd known the conversations with Mark and Laura would go exactly as they had. He leaned back in the chair, feeling a strange mix of grief, gratitude, and anger. Grief for the fact that his wife had had to think this way, gratitude that she had, and anger not just at his children, but at himself, for not realizing sooner how they might see him as a problem to solve rather than a father to cherish. The villa, hidden life insurance policy, private bank accounts. Linda had built a quiet fortress around him, layer by layer, without ever letting him know. Closing the folder, Daniel tied the ribbon back around it and slid it into his leather satchel. He wouldn't risk leaving it in the house now that he understood its value and its danger. As he turned off the lamp and stepped out of the study, he felt a shift inside him. The past week had been about defending himself from his children's pressure. But now he had something they didn't know existed, and he intended to keep it that way. The game had changed by morning. Daniel's mind was set. He wasn't going to sit and wait for the next concerned phone call from Mark or Laura. Linda had given him a lifeline, and now it was time to use it. He made a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled the blue leather folder from his satchel. With his reading glasses perched on his nose, he studied the letter again, this time focusing on the names Anna and Peter Alvarez. The first call was to Portugal. It took a few tries, but eventually a warm, accented voice answered, "Senor Foster, this is Anna." Daniel explained who he was and how he'd found her contact information in Linda's letter. He expected formality, but instead, Anna's tone softened instantly. "Linda spoke of you often," she said. "She made me promise that if this day came, I would take care of the villa for you. It's ready any time you want it." The words hit him harder than he expected. Linda had been planning for his protection long before her illness took hold. They spoke for nearly half an hour. Anna described the villa sunlit rooms, a wraparound balcony overlooking the sea, the lemon trees in the garden, and assured him it was well maintained. She also mentioned a locked cabinet in the study there for your eyes only, as Linda had instructed. When he hung up, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The next call was to Lisbon. Brisk professional voice answered. "Peter Alvarez, law offices." "Mr. Alvarez, my name is Daniel Foster. My wife Linda was a client of yours." A pause. "Yes, Mr. Foster. I've been expecting you, though I'm sorry for the circumstances." Peter confirmed the villa's deed was solely in Linda's name, and that under Portuguese inheritance law, it had passed entirely to Daniel, he assured. Him the property was legally protected from any claims by his children or anyone else in the U.S. than Peter. Brought up something that made Daniel's shoulders ease for the first time in days. "Linda also left instructions for me to act on your behalf if you wished. If you authorize me, I can send formal letters to anyone attempting to interfere with your assets here or in America. Consider it a legal perimeter." Daniel agreed without hesitation. Within hours, Peter had emailed him draft cease and desist letters, tactful but unmistakably firm, addressed to both Mark and Laura. They didn't accuse, but they made it clear Daniel's affairs were his alone to manage. After the calls, Daniel sat at the table with a legal pad and wrote 3 headings at the top. What they know, what they don't know, what I want them to think under what they know. He listed the house and the fact it was paid off. Under what they don't know, he wrote in large letters. Villa in Portugal. Bank accounts. Anna, Peter. Under what I want them to think, he simply put that I'm staying put quietly. With no big plans. It wasn't just about keeping secrets. It was about controlling the narrative. If Mark and Laura thought he was rooted in Ohio, they wouldn't suspect he had an escape hatch halfway across the world before the day was over. Daniel went to the post office and rented a P.O. box. No more important mail going to the house. He stopped by the bank to set up a separate safety deposit box and place the blue folder inside. And for good measure, he bought a refundable one-way ticket to Lisbon for a date a few months out, just to have it ready. Linda had warned him. He was listening. The next time Mark and Laura came knocking, they'd find a man who wasn't. Just holding his ground, he was quietly fortifying it. For the next week, Daniel moved quietly, almost methodically, as if he were back in his army days, following a plan, step by step, without revealing the mission to anyone. He kept the blue folder locked away in the safety deposit box, visiting it only once to make sure everything was in order. Then he began gathering documents. His passport, Linda's death certificate, copies of the villa deed, and the new legal correspondence from Peter Alvarez. These went into a slim weathered leather briefcase he kept hidden in the bottom drawer of his bedroom dresser. The next step was communication control. Daniel stopped answering his phone every time Mark or Laura called. Instead, he'd let the calls go to voicemail, then respond hours later with short, polite texts. Busy today, we'll call later. He wasn't being rude. He was teaching them that access to him was on his terms. One evening after dinner, he sat down at his desk with a fresh yellow legal pad and rewrote his 3-column strategy from the week before. This time, the lists were sharper, more deliberate. What they know: house is paid off, I'm living alone, still adjusting after Linda's passing. What they don't know: villa in Algarve, fully deeded to me. Private bank accounts. Anna's role as caretaker, Peter Alvarez as legal shield. My safety deposit box. The one-way ticket to Portugal? What I want them to think: I'm staying here indefinitely. No. Travel plans. Still dependent on local routines. Once that was in place, he moved on to the next part of the plan, sending a message without saying a word. Daniel started gathering every single item in the house that belonged to Mark and Laura. Old sports trophies, yearbooks, boxes of childhood artwork, a guitar. Mark had abandoned in the basement, Laura's prom dress still hanging in the guest closet. He packed them neatly into labeled boxes, each sealed with packing tape. Then he called a moving service, not for a large truck, but for 2 small local deliveries. Each set of boxes was sent directly to their respective homes, with a short handwritten note on top: returning what belongs to you, keeping what belongs to me. Dad, the movers, reported back that both deliveries were received without comment. But Daniel could imagine the expressions on his children's faces. It wasn't about the stuff, it was about the message: my home is mine. Your things no longer have a place here. Later that week, he stopped by the travel agency in town. Yes. Daniel still preferred face-to-face arrangements over clicking around on the internet. Confirmed his refundable ticket to Lisbon. He asked the agent to add a flex option so he could change the departure date with minimal notice. She handed him the updated itinerary. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his briefcase. Every move he made was small. It's almost invisible to anyone not looking closely. But together they formed a wall, a protective perimeter Linda would have approved of at night. He found himself sleeping a little easier. It wasn't that the tension with Mark and Laura had vanished, far from it. But now he wasn't just reacting. He was ahead of them. And when he pictured the day he might hand his boarding pass to the gate agent at JFK, bound for Lisbon, the thought didn't fill him with sadness. It filled him with a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know exactly when that day would come. But when it did, he'd be ready, and his children would never see it coming. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when Daniel saw them pull up. First came Mark's SUV, then Laura's sedan right behind it. Both doors swung open, and out stepped his children, and a third figure in a charcoal gray suit carrying a slim leather briefcase. Daniel didn't need an introduction. The man's polished shoes, pressed slacks, and carefully measured smile told him everything. They'd brought a lawyer. He opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," he said evenly, stepping aside. They filed into the living room. Mark took his usual spot on the sofa. Laura perched primly in the armchair, and the lawyer, a tall, thin man with glasses, chose the seat directly across from Daniel, as if this were his office and not Daniel's home. "Mr. Foster," the lawyer began, placing the briefcase at his feet, "your children have asked me to join today, so we can have a productive discussion about your future and the management of your property." Daniel didn't miss the word management. "I appreciate your concern," Daniel said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "But my future isn't a group project." Mark leaned forward, his tone sliding into rehearsed patience. "Dad, no one's trying to take anything from you. We just want to make sure you're in a place that's easier to maintain. The house is mine," Daniel cut in, his gaze steady, paid off. "Maintained, secure, and staying that way." Lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Sometimes, Mr. Foster, people your age?" Daniel's eyes sharpened. "My age," he repeated. "I may be in my 70s, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. I'm not senile, I'm not broke, and I'm not handing over control of my life to anyone, family, or otherwise." Laura tried a softer approach. "We just think that's the problem," Daniel said. "You think this is about what you want, but here's how it's going to be." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke. Slowly, clearly, "This is my home. I'm not selling it.
Right.
I'm not downsizing. I'm not signing anything that gives either of you or your attorney here any say over my property or finances. If you want to visit me, you're welcome. If you want to manage something, manage your own lives." The lawyer cleared his throat. "You understand, Mr. Foster? If you become unable to, I understand perfectly," Daniel said, his tone clipped but controlled. "I also understand my legal rights. I've already consulted counsel of my own, and I've put protections in place to ensure my wishes are followed. You don't need to know the details, but rest assured, they're ironclad." Mark sat back, clearly frustrated. "So that's it? You're just shutting us out?" Daniel stood, signaling the meeting was over. "I'm setting boundaries. If you can respect them, we'll get along fine. If not, well, I guess you'll see less of me." They exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said another word. One by one, they left, the lawyer offering a tight nod on the way out. When the front door closed, Daniel exhaled slowly. He'd kept his cool, stayed in control, and sent a message that couldn't be misunderstood.
Right.
They'd expected an old man they could nudge into compliance. Instead, they'd found someone who'd already drawn the line and fortified it. Outside, the rain had stopped. Daniel stood at the window, watching them drive away, a faint smile touching his lips. Linda would have been proud 3 days after. That tense living room standoff. Daniel found a thick envelope in his P.O. box. The return address read Lisboa, Portugal. He drove home before opening it, wanting the quiet of his kitchen to steady his hands. Inside were several official-looking documents, each stamped and signed confirmation from the Lisbon Land Registry that the villa in Algarve was legally his, with no liens, no disputes, and no inheritance claims from anyone else. There was also a personal letter from Peter Alvarez. Mr. Foster, it began, "The property is secure. As per your wife's instructions, all maintenance and utilities have been handled in advance for the next year. Anna remains the caretaker and holds the keys. You may arrive whenever you wish, and the villa will be ready." Daniel sat back in his chair, the papers spread out before him. It was real now, not just a secret possibility, but a concrete, protected option. For the first time since Linda's death, he felt the tension in his shoulders ease. He had a place, far from the prying eyes of Mark and Laura, where he could live on his own terms. That afternoon, he went into the attic with 3 empty bins labeled in bold black marker, "Go. Stay and travel." The go bin filled quickly with things he wouldn't need anymore. Extra furniture, old tools, outdated electronics. These he'd donate quietly, avoiding the kind of help that meant his kids pawing through his belongings. The stay bin was harder. These were items tied to the house itself. The oak dining table Linda had refinished, the antique rocking chair in the den, the heavy quilt her grandmother had sewn. If he left for Portugal, they would remain here, in the place they belonged. The travel bin was the most personal. His passport, important documents, a handful of family photos, Linda's recipe box, the watch she gave him on their 25th anniversary, and the leather-bound journal he'd started keeping since she passed. Things small enough to carry, but too valuable to leave behind. By evening, the bins sat in neat rows in the attic. The go items would be gone within a week, the stay items covered and stored, and the travel bin locked in his bedroom closet until the day came to move. The next morning, he called the moving company again, the same one that had delivered Mark and Laura's childhood belongings. This time, he arranged for them to take the go items to a local veterans charity. No fuss, no notice to the family. Afterward, he walked through the house slowly, room by room. He paused in the living room, where the afternoon sun cast a warm stripe across the carpet. No longer felt like a place he was clinging to out of fear of change. It felt like a place he was choosing to keep for as long as he wanted, and to walk away from when the moment was right. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel had the villa documents locked in his safety deposit box and his travel bin packed down to the essentials. He poured himself a bourbon, sat on the back porch, and listened to the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling into the night. If the past weeks had taught him anything, it was this. Survival wasn't just about holding on. Sometimes it was about knowing exactly when and how to let go, and now, for the first time, Daniel knew he could. It was just past noon on Saturday when Daniel heard the pounding at the front door. Not the tentative knock of a visitor. This was sharp, rapid, and unmistakably impatient. He opened it to find Mark standing there, face flushed, jaw tight. Without waiting for an invitation, his son stepped inside, his voice already raised. "Are you kidding me, Dad? You send all my stuff back like I'm some tenant being evicted? Can't just..." Daniel closed the door slowly behind him, letting the lock click into place. "I returned what belongs to you," he said evenly. "I'm keeping what belongs to me. That's fair." Mark's hands flew up. "Fair? You're acting like we're strangers. Laura and I have been bending over backward to help you, and you treat us like thieves." Daniel held his ground. "You offered help I didn't ask for, in a way that suited you, not me. That's not help, Mark. That's control. And I don't need controlling." Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his tone. "You're being selfish. Mom would have wanted you to think about the family, not just yourself." Daniel's eyes locked on his son's. "Don't you dare use your mother's name to push your agenda. She knew exactly who I am, and she trusted me to make my own choices. That hasn't changed." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Mark's face twisted with frustration. "Fine, if you want to rot in this house alone, go ahead. But don't expect us to come running when you finally realize you can't handle it." Daniel's tone didn't waver. "I've been handling myself just fine for 73 years. I don't need permission from my children to live my life." Mark turned toward the door, muttering something under his breath. But before he could leave, Daniel added, "This conversation is over. If you want to visit, you're welcome. If you want to argue about my home or my finances, save yourself the trip." Mark paused for half a beat, then yanked the door open and stormed out, slamming it behind him. Daniel stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle back into the house. He could feel his pulse slowing, the adrenaline fading. He hadn't raised his voice once, but every word had landed exactly where it needed to. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and looked out the window. The maple tree in the front yard swayed gently in the breeze, the late afternoon sun catching on its leaves. Linda had been right. They would try to take what they could, not out of pure malice, but out of a belief that they knew better. Today had been proof that standing his ground wasn't just about property. It was about dignity. He took a slow sip, then set the glass down. There was nothing left to discuss. He'd made his position clear, and from now on, any pressure from his children would meet the same calm, unmovable wall. In the stillness of the moment, he realized something unexpected. He wasn't angry. He was free. The house was his. The villa was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, his future was entirely his own. After losing his wife, Linda, Daniel Foster found himself alone in the Ohio home they'd shared for decades, still grieving. He soon discovered his adult children, Mark and Laura, were pressuring him to sell the house, claiming it was too big and costly for him. But when he revealed the mortgage had been paid off years earlier, their surprise made something clear. This wasn't about his comfort. It was about the asset. While sorting through Linda's study, Daniel found a blue leather folder containing her private bank accounts, a deed to a villa in Portugal, and a heartfelt letter warning him the children might try to take control of his life. She urged him to use the villa as a safe escape if needed. Daniel quietly contacted the villa's caretaker, Anna, and attorney Peter Alvarez, securing both properties and drawing up a personal strategy. What they know, what they know. Don't what I want them to think. Step by step, he set boundaries, removed his children's belongings from his home, and refused to sign away control. By the end, Daniel stood firm, calm, unshakable, and free, with his future entirely in his hands. Your independence is worth protecting. Love your family, but don't surrender your dignity or control to please them. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, they're gates that protect what matters most inside. If Daniel's story touched you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to stand up for your independence? I'd love to hear your experience. And if you want more stories that inspire courage and self-respect, subscribe now. Your next chapter could be one click away.